I'm Chris Luzniak,
And I'm Rob Byer,
and this is the Debate Math Podcast,
the show where we redefine what it means to debate in mathematics and education.
where multiple sides of ideas are explored, evidence matters, and we all grow and learn from hearing each other.
Because the world and our classrooms are not binary.
So let's dig into this month's debate. Math has often been seen as the universal language, a foundation of science, technology, and problem solving, but it's also often a source of struggle, frustration, and even fear for thousands and thousands of students.
So, what's going on? Is there a problem with how we teach math? Or is this just a criticism missing the point, overlooking the structure, logic, and discipline that make math so powerful in the first place?
Some say we're losing rigor in the name of relevance. Others say we've clung too tightly to outdated methods that no longer serve our students.
In this episode, we want to explore what's working, what's not, and what a truly effective math education might look like in the 21st century. As we debate the resolution, math education in the US is broken.
So, here, arguing that math education in the US is broken, we have an educator since 2003 who has been a classroom teacher, teacher specialist instructor for the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, and presenter at conferences around the world. He co-founded the website Open Middle, has been published in Edutopia and Education Week, is the author of Open Middle Math, Problems that Unlock Student Thinking, and he's created the hashtag #ObserveMe movement. He's also the founder and president of Grassroots Workshops. It's Robert Kaplinski. Hi, Robert.
Hey, everyone.
Good to have you here. Can you remind us where you are and what your current role is?
Yeah, I live in Long Beach, California. I'm currently working kind of as a consultant, but also working as president of Grassroots Workshops so we can bring online workshops to educators.
Very good. And then now the question we ask all of our guests, when has math been controversial to you?
Yeah, I think where I go with this is just this reality that when I graduated from college with a degree in math, I felt like I knew everything about math. And ever since then, it's just shown me I don't know anything about math. Like I could do math like a robot, but when someone asked me like why it worked or how it actually worked, I realized that I couldn't explain that. And it kind of made me concerned because if I don't understand it myself, what am I possibly teaching students? And just this reality that what it means to be good at math is not defined by one sort of thing. You know, historically, maybe it's being a good robot, but I don't know if that's really what we want it to be.
Very good. Thank you.
And now arguing that math ed in the US is not broken, we have an educator who spent 17 years working in public, private, and charter schools, grades 1 through 8, across Indiana, New York City, and Wisconsin, serving roles from teacher to coach to administrator. She holds a master's in educational policy and educational leadership from Columbia University and is completing her PhD in math ed from Indiana University. She hosts the recently resurrected Math and Other Things podcast, is the mom of a college freshman and a high school senior, sings along to every song, even though she doesn't know the words to any of them, and lives by the motto, be grateful and do good work. She's determined to change the narrative of admitting that one is not a math person by inspiring teachers to teach ambitiously and maybe even have a little fun while doing it. It's Courtney Flessner. Welcome back, Courtney.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for having me. Hi, Robert.
Can you remind our listeners where you are and what your current role is?
Sure. I am currently in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I am the director of Keep Indiana Learning, which is the professional learning department of the Central Indiana Educational Service Center. So I oversee all of the professional learning that we do in all the content areas, but my true love is math. And so I am still doing a lot of work in schools and professional development myself in the area of math.
And then the question we ask everybody, and we've asked you before,
Yeah.
when has math been controversial to you?
Yeah, it's a good question because when we were talking right before, I was kind of thinking today math is controversial to me because I was working with teachers and you get met with resistance, and I understand the resistance and I understand the discomfort that teachers feel because I went through that exact same process myself. And so I think when we're just sort of surrounded by so much information and so many opinions, and it's so easy to find that information and even find the opinion that you want to hear, that makes math controversial because it keeps us having the important conversations that we need to have and thinking about the things that we need to think about.
Wonderful. And with that, let's get into the debate. All right, we begin with opening statements from each of our speakers. You each have 2 minutes to present your arguments, and we're starting with Robert, arguing that math ed is broken in the US. Robert, you're up first, and your time begins now.
It's tragically common for someone to proudly say, I'm not a math person, or maybe you felt that way yourself, but few people are supposed to hear that. Yet we'd be shocked if someone said proudly, I'm illiterate. These are essentially the same statements, but for different school subjects, math instead of English. Yet when it comes to math, we accept it as normal, and that's how broken math education has become. So we're here today to discuss the resolution. Should we take bold steps to fix math education in the United States? My claim is that yes, we absolutely must take immediate action because our current system is failing students, teachers, and the society it's meant to serve. Math education is broken, and I have 4 warrants for this. 1, students are losing interest and confidence. According to the TIMSS study, this Trends in International Mathematics and Science study, 38% of 4th graders say they like math, but by 8th grade, that drops to only 17%. Confidence in math also falls too, with most students feeling sure of themselves in 4th grade, while the majority shift to not feel confident in math by the end of 8th grade. Warrant number 2, teachers don't have enough time to teach everything they're expected to cover. In a survey I conducted of 383 math teachers, more than 82% of them said that they could not fit a full year of math standards into one school year. The system and the state standards are overloaded and unrealistic. 3, colleges are telling us the results aren't working. ACT data shows that at best, only 42% of high school graduates are ready for college algebra, even though most already passed algebra in high school and middle school. And 4, employers are saying that even graduates lack essential skills like critical thinking, data analysis, and problem solving. We built a system focused on quick answers instead of deep reasoning. So as you can see, the math education system is broken from every angle, and students, teachers, colleges, and employers all agree. If we don't change course, we'll keep producing generations who believe that they are not math people.
Thank you, Robert. Now we will hear from Courtney, arguing that math ed in the U.S. is not broken. Courtney, you have 2 minutes, and your time begins now.
All right, so first I want to talk about the definition of broken. If something's truly broken, it doesn't work at all. But math education in the US does work for some people, and frankly, that's the primary issue. When you make statements like US math education is broken, there will always be a group of people who will respond with, math worked for me, I did great in math. Even teachers of mathematics do this. They teach the way they were taught because it worked for them. And oddly, they do so even when it didn't work for them. Our culture is deeply rooted in systems and structures designed to work for a select few. I don't believe math education is broken. I believe it works exactly for whom politicians and wealthy Americans want it to work, and that has been the case for a very, very long time. Therein lies the problem. It's a systemic issue that we need to address. The second danger in using the broken narrative is that it immediately provides fuel for deficit-based thinking, which I find is broadly shared on social media. As math education leaders, we have to be cognizant of this fact and ensure our language does not fuel their fire. When certain people hear the phrase, math education is broken, it becomes an excuse for inaction. I can see the posts now. I only have 24% of my students scoring proficiently, but math education is broken in the US, so there's nothing I can do about it. We must avoid creating that particular response at all costs. Instead of talking about what's broken, we need to focus on leveraging what we know works. And I actually know Robert's an advocate of this and appreciate and agree with many of his suggestions he makes for bettering mathematics in the US. The 2001 Adding It Up publication acknowledged the need for professional development as it specifically states, quote, teachers cannot automatically know how to teach more effectively. Learning to teach well cannot be accomplished once and for all in a pre-service program. It is a career-long challenge. This is where our focus should be. We need to create environments where everyone, all teachers, all students, and all instructional leaders have opportunities to engage in ongoing learning and can feel successful while finding the joy that leaders of math education believe to be true about mathematics. Let's choose our words and make plans wisely, always choosing an approach that doesn't leave any room for deficit-based thinking.
Boom. Those are two powerful opening statements. Coming out with guns blazing, both of you with brilliant things to say. I hear lots of great stuff on both sides and some overlap already, some things you're already agreeing on. I think my first question I have for you both is kind of like what can we parse out what are the things that are broken or are not broken? Like, is it what we're teaching, how we're teaching it? Like, what are the pieces that you really want to point out to that were the main concern?
So I honestly, I think one of the absolute biggest issues is just kind of lies in content and pedagogy knowledge. Um, I think content is an enormous issue. An entire faction of teachers that were educated in a way that taught procedures, gave step-by-step directions, and some people that really worked. They were rule followers. They could follow the rules and get the correct answers, and now they're teaching that way. um, and they like I ask a high school teacher, why does keep change flip work, and they can't answer that question. Like, they can't answer that question, and I find that fascinating because they're teaching things like algebra 2 and calculus, and they can't explain to me why why keep change flip works. And so I think content knowledge is one of the biggest issues that we have, and then the pedagogy that we're using in order to do that. So I think a lot of things that Robert said in terms of confidence and students losing interest, that can be remedied through developing teachers' math pedagogy knowledge. And I think that's, to me, I think right now in this moment, that's the primary issue.
Yeah, I'll 100% agree with everything Courtney said there. I'll add some of my own. I think math standards and just state standards in general have become far too political. Like, is some state not teaching adding? Like, is some state not teaching, like, discussing about this stuff? Like, we only have, like, there's not that much that should be political about standards. And why is this a problem is that every single state is now doing its own thing after kind of a majority were doing Common Core, and it's becoming decreasingly similar and more polarized. And so instead of trying to work together to make something that was iterating, like, let's be real, Common Core was not the perfect set of standards, but it was a big improvement over maybe just every state doing their own thing. Instead of iterating upon that and making it better, it just devolved into everyone else. And so I think there's just too much disagreement. And that leads me to my next point. Again, I agree with everything Courtney said with no notes. I think status quo bias is another one, though, that we keep doing it this way because we've always done it this way. And it worked. She said it perfectly. It worked for me. Like, you're saying it's not going to work for them. And so you have these just patterns where, like, let's be real, what we need as a society, the skills we need as a society keep changing, but the standards don't keep changing, that we're not actually preparing kids for that. And so we just keep doing this way and doing it and expecting different results, but getting the same results.
Let me follow up with that. And Courtney kind of alluded to this, but Robert, I want to ask you, so like, what about the people it has worked for? Like, people who might be listening and say, like, it worked for me. Maybe something about the system was a trial by fire that helped them become good at math. Like, maybe it is working for some people. If that's the case, is it not broken?
I actually thought, Courtney, I'm going to see if I can paraphrase, that it's working perfectly for some. No notes on there. Yeah, I think it's absolutely working perfectly for some. But I think that, and I have a guest helping me in this debate, as you can see at home. If you're just listening, it's one of my two cats. So I think that it really depends on how you measure success. Like, for example, a lot of people measure success in school by getting kids into calculus and passing the AP calculus test. But when we follow up with those students, because we don't measure, typically we measure college acceptance, we don't measure college readiness, and we see what happens to those students after. There's a lot of kids, like over 80%, who have to retake calculus when they get to college. So, like, how successful was it? We have a system, and we're measuring success by ways don't actually reflect success in the real world. So I think that it does. And again, again, everything Courtney says, I have yet to disagree with most of it. The people who are teaching math are often the ones who were successful with the way that we have been teaching math. And so the idea of shifting to actually develop more than just this procedural understanding and develop conceptual understanding, it's a really hard thing because we're expected to teach in ways no one ever taught us. And that is a really uncomfortable reality to navigate.
Yeah, and then throw back to Courtney, kind of what Robert was saying, like, colleges are saying, it's not working, employers are saying it's not working. So Isn't it broken then?
No, because I don't think that all colleges and employers know exactly what they're talking about, you know? Like I think that and Robert alluded to this, like how are we measuring success? Like what does that mean to be prepared for college? What does that mean to be prepared for the workforce? And um and so is it a high SAT score, or is it, being a critical problem solver that can, grapple through figuring out the answer to something no matter what it is? And I think that's where um those are big questions that we have to ask because the world is changing very quickly. Like Robert said, we can't be teaching the same way today that we were. I mean, I'm in my 29th year of education, and I learned a lot when I first started, but I also can't even believe some of the things that I did. And I think a lot of us as math educators say the exact same thing. And I've been thinking about that more and more and more as I'm doing some of my work and my own research, and defining the need for math is so different. Like this is the first generation of kids, I think, that was born in a world of smart technology where answers are right at your fingertips. And so to get them to not want to just use a calculator to find an answer, that has to be enticing. Like we have to be doing things to help them see the wonder and awe of what mathematics is and how they can use those skills across the day, across all their content areas, across every period in high school, whatever it is, and beyond. And so doing things to make those connections is part of the work that we have to do, and making it so that employers and colleges hear that is part of the work too. So while I see how like a form of measurement might be making that, judgment, I think part of the issue is how we're measuring success and readiness.
So, Courtney, I want to come back to you because you're arguing that the system's not broken. What about high school math? Like, is high school math like in its current state? Like, is that getting students ready and prepared for the world, or like should we reimagine that? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not everything is broken. Maybe some things are broken. And like, so what? Like, what about high school math? How can we? I guess this is going to be like a twofold. Like, one, how can we reimagine what high school math could be? And two, how can we get colleges to be on board with what we're doing in K-12?
It's really hard for me to not answer this question without saying that I have a freshman in college and a senior in high school. And so I am the parent of two children that have just completed, all the years of math learning. Um, and one of them loves math and views herself as a math person, and the other one hates it. And when I say, or, I am not a math person, and I'm like, that's interesting because you always did really well in math. And his response is, but I didn't like any of it. And so I think that's an example of how this is a kid that he he didn't want to play school, but when he needed to play school, he played school so that he could get the grade that he needed to, get the class rank and the scholarship money and blah 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 that he needed. Like it's a game of school. And so, and we keep talking to them like sometimes you have to play the game of school. That's not okay. We do not agree with this game of school that we're asking you to play. Dad and I are working really hard to try to make that stop, but it's something that exists. So I think that that's sort of one of my perspectives. And when I would ask them about what was happening in math class, I was always kind of bummed, and I don't want to disparage any school district or whatever because I know everybody's doing the best they can and what they know. But it was a bummer knowing what could be and the potential that was out there, given, you know, just just the information that there is to to be using to be great math teachers. So I love having conversations with high school administrators who are working really hard to rethink math in their schools. I think I might have mentioned this in another conversation that we had, Chris and Rob, that there's a principal here in Indiana who they got everything together. They took all the standards and they rearranged them all. And they created new courses so that they would still be covering the standards, but they made it all work so that it made more sense and it wasn't so isolated into this algebra, geometry kind of siloed situation. And those are the stories that we need to work really hard to tell because people need to hear that and they need to understand it's possible, even if it was happening in a small town in Indiana. And then that has to get transferred to, academia. And like, a reason why I will likely never be a part of the academy is for that reason. Like making the connections with the school and in the schools and continuing to know and learn what's right for kids and the reality of the situation and all of that's really important to me. I'm not saying that people in the academy don't do that, but there's such a that's like a whole that's another debate, you guys. like the role of the academy in math education, which I thought a lot about. I have a whole definition of that I've created, but um it's an interesting conversation, which is why it's a much bigger systemic issue because Robert's right. It's not okay for so many people in the world to not consider themselves a math person. Or then the fact that it's prevalent everywhere is absolutely mind-blowing. Um, but it's also interesting to think how people define themselves as math people and why. So I'm hoping I'm answering your question, but I do think like this is a lot about conversations between groups of people, between groups of people, between groups of people who are open to having those conversations and listening. And those are hard, uncomfortable conversations to have.
So, and Robert, coming to you. So, we often hear in math ed now that high school math is broken, which is why I asked Courtney to kind of like push on that. But we never hear anything about K-8. So I'm guessing K-8's not broken. Like, what, like if you were to say something's broken with K-8, like what is broken with K through 8?
I think maybe it's important for me to take a step back and just explain or just to unpack one question, which is what is the point of math? Like, what's the point of teaching math? And I think you can go like a bajillion different ways, but I think that there's the governmental political answer, and then there's maybe a broader answer. The governmental political answer is super, super simple. It's college and career readiness. Literally every single state says college and career readiness. Now, you can absolutely push back on that, like from a existential, it's about the beauty of math and being a creative thinker and problem solver. But from a political perspective, it's all about, are you ready for, does school prepare you for college and career, whatever comes after school, K-12? And then, so using that as a lens then to talk about, K-12 mathematics, the question is like, what are those skills? Like, I hope this is obvious that the skills you need today in 2025 with like AI were not the skills you needed 5 years ago when ChatGPT and things like that didn't exist. And they certainly are different than the skills you needed in 2012 when like the Common Core was adopted by many states. I live in California. They're still using Common Core, the same standards from 2012. So like, let's just be real. If these were the standards that were written to serve the needs of college and career readiness in 2012, then I can most certainly assure you that these are not standards preparing kids for college and career readiness. And so now taking this from a lens, all the standards in theory from K to 12 lend towards the same goal, that you build upon standards and you build upon standards until you have this deeper knowledge. But you're preparing students for, at best, the skills you needed in 2012, in most states. And so I just think that just like what you need to be ready for college and career changes every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, every 6 months, every week, then the standards need to be shifting as well. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of times there's a rush to get through elementary standards. Acceleration, don't even get me started. I think that was the last podcast episode. But the issue here is that we're rushing through like what we perceive to be easier standards in K-8 to get to these harder standards. Again, perception of harder standards in high school. If you're listening, I'm doing air quotes. And the reality is that it's often just a rush to stop taking math. Like you get done with your stuff and then you're done. Like who the hell knows if they're ready to take calculus when they have to make a choice in 6th grade? It's just preposterous. So yeah, I think that the standards are pretty screwed all over.
I have a whole bunch of questions. I just first want to go to Courtney here. I'm curious about the acceleration part because we haven't talked about that much. Do you feel similar to Robert? Is that a point of agreement? Are we rushing math too much, or is there a point to have multiple pathways?
No, I'm in full agreement. I have a lot of thoughts and concerns around high ability verbiage and what that means and how schools interpret that and how they interpret that as being let's teach the grade level above and then at some point everybody misses content. Um, my own kids were a product of that, and it was absolutely devastating to see what happened to my son as he was going through that. And luckily we knew, so we could prepare our daughter. But like, that's a privilege for them that so many kids don't have. So, yeah, we're in full agreement on that.
All right, I'm going to go back to Robert now. I'm hearing a lot of changes you want, like you mentioned the standards and acceleration, like all these things, structural things. I'm thinking this is really expensive financially, time consuming, the labor to shift people's thinking. Like this is a lot. How would we ever manage something like this to actually change if it's that broken?
Yeah, I'm not. It's much easier to throw stones than it is to repair. I'll start by saying some things that uh, we're driven by assessments and the assessment results, but we assess what's easy to measure, not what is important to measure. And so you have a lot of things where, guess what? It's really easy to measure robotic skills. It's a lot harder to measure critical thinking and analytical reasoning and creative problem solving. That's really hard to measure. So that is not what we're assessing. If that was something we were assessing in, more depth, stuff would change really quickly. Okay, so I have a heavy metaphor here to help you see how I see acceleration. And now it's not my intention to say that there's no student who would benefit from acceleration, but here's a heavy metaphor. So if you are in favor of the death penalty, the actual death penalty, then you have to accept the fact that there will be innocent people who are put to death. There's a ton of data, you can search for that online, that shows that innocent people have been put to death. Now, if you are in favor of acceleration, then you have to accept the fact that there will be children who are rushed so quickly through math that they would have loved math, but instead they are so confused because they had to do like a year and a half in a year or something like 3 years in a year, and they hate math, and they would have gone on to find STEM careers or just anything in math education or mathematics, and they hate it. And so if they had been put through mathematics at a normal pace, this would not be a thing, or it would be much less likely to be a thing. And so I just want to just unpack that there's a lot of realities between the standards that we choose, between the acceleration pathways, this rush to get to this arbitrary, like keeping up with the Joneses, where you're trying to get kids to calculus as quickly as possible. College professors would prefer that calculus remain a college level class, but just we have these backwards views of what is expected that we're breaking kids. Like no one's like, wait, my kid's in like 12th grade English in 12th grade. Why are they not in 12th grade English in 10th grade? Like there's no rush for other subjects. Somehow we've just perverted that in math education, and it's a travesty. And so to answer your question again, where would I begin? I think that if you just started with breaking acceleration and let people spend the whole year teaching math and not this rush, that would be a big thing. And then in terms of cost, states are already revising their standards. Like that's happening. So it's not like that's going to be an additional cost. That they were just to pick a less intense, high pressure, rushing through the standards pathway, I think that would make a big difference as well.
And let me go to Courtney. So I'm wondering kind of the opposite of that. If you're saying it's not broken, are we just kind of continue to put little patches on this broken, complicated system and nothing ever is going to really get better? We're just going to keep making small changes?
Yeah, no, I like yes, I like what you just said. Um, and so it's an interesting idea, patches to fix, because that is also, something I was thinking about in getting ready for this debate. Um, because that's so often what people are looking for. They're like, nobody's passing anything, so we need the curriculum, that is going to solve that problem. We need the extra people that are going to be there to help everybody get better at teaching math. There's all this, there somehow people are finding the money to throw at things like that. It's what happens after that that's an enormous issue. How is that curriculum being used? How are those extra people being used? How are they being trained? How's everybody being trained in the curriculum? So it feels like we're finding the money, but the patches aren't working. So again, I the reason why I don't think it's broken per se is because if it's the right materials with the right people that have the right training, really amazing things happen. And you can read about that, you can hear about that, you see that, and that's the stuff that fascinates me. And I keep wondering, Robert said, like, states are already doing this. Indiana, I've never seen such an overhaul in standards and assessment that I've kind of watched to go down in the past few years. But and the amount of money they've sunk into it. Wow. At the same time, they're sinking gobs of money into science of reading stuff. And so it's coming from somewhere. It's just how are we using it? How are we being responsible with it? So they aren't patches. There's stuff that end up, making an entire shift in our culture and how we think about math.
And thinking about that shift of culture, Robert, I'm thinking about Courtney said in her opening something about, if we say math is broken, we give people an excuse to be like, oh, there's nothing I can do about it, right? Like as teachers or whatever. Are you just perpetuating the problems then by saying these big claims?
Actually, in that vein, I want to actually say the thing I think we are most in disagreement about, which is just what does broken mean? I believe I'm paraphrasing roughly that you said that your definition of broken is that it's not working at all. I think my definition is a little bit more flexible. Like, for example, I can have something broken with my car and it still takes me to where I need to go, even if it's not as comfortable or convenient. And so I have a more like less absolute version of broken, but I think by and large, we're like very much on the same page. I think she makes a really good point about if you say something like, for example, I used to say low kids and high kids, and I now realize that says a hell of a lot more about my teaching ability and less about the students than it does about the students themselves. I think she makes a really nuanced point about if you call something broken, does that make it an excuse to just be like, well, it's unfixable? And I'll be honest, I'm probably really biased in my own belief that just because it's broken, it's not forever broken. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some people who do see it as this is just the way it is, and Robert said it's broken, and so I guess we're screwed. So I will think on that more. That's not how I thought about it, but doesn't mean it's like my way is the right way.
Historically, as we were, going in through math, it's all about, algorithms and focusing on right answers, and then we made this shift into processes and how we get to an answer because we want better problem solvers and thinkers. So I'm curious, like with this new transition of going into AI, like how does AI uh incorporate into like what you both are saying about whether math ed is broken or not, and like how can we whether utilize AI or embrace AI or I guess kick AI to the curb with this, like where does that fit? And I know Robert, you just did a session about AI at CMC South, so I mean maybe you could speak to that, and maybe Courtney, you and your research has been looking at AI as well. So where does that fit? Because it's here. It's not like it's going away. It's here.
So it's funny you bring that up. I was in a school today, and the group at the one of the groups at the table said to me, "So what should we be thinking about regarding AI?" And I kind of got this smirk on my face, and I was like, "That's a really interesting question." I was like, "What are you thinking about without me answering that?" And they were like, "Nothing. We have no conversations about it at school. Nobody's bringing it up. Nothing." And I was like, okay, so what you're thinking about is you have questions about it, you're wondering what to do about it. And I think that right there is the first thing that we have to solve, like giving um, just an intro to AI, having AI literacy, understanding what it is, where it comes from, how it works, moving into how it can help, what is it a substitute for, what it's not a substitute for. Um, and interestingly, my daughter was talking to someone about what she was majoring in, and she wants to major in physical therapy. And she, out of nowhere, we'd never talked about this before. She goes, I feel like that's kind of a job that's not going to get taken over by AI. And I was like, wow, like that's interesting. But it gets you wondering, like, how could it help in physical therapy, in the physical therapy field and things like that. And I think those are things that people are thinking about because so many are so daunted by it. And so it feels like the tendency is to run away. A lot of districts are calling, like district tech people are like, I need help. I cannot get another phone call or email telling me to block a site for the school, for the corporation to not be able to get on it because that's not solving any problems. I need help educating my district on how to make this happen. And it's a big issue. And I think that ties a whole in terms of Robert talking about college and career readiness and staying up to date with what we're teaching and why we're teaching. AI is putting an entirely new spin on that I think is going to be fascinating to watch and be a part of in whatever way.
So my new presentation is called "What Should We Be Teaching If AI Can Already Do the Math?" And I think that is like the question that is on people's mind. I think that if we start with just this college and career readiness question, and that we're trying to use, again, this is one lens, but if we're trying to use this from a lens of if the point of K-12 math education is to prepare kids for college and career readiness, and the question is, how do we prepare kids for this? Because what you see when you look at, I've just in this presentation, the latest data from 2023 to increasing to 2025 is huge increases in, not shockingly, in that their incoming employees have skills in AI and big data, basically being able to use computers to analyze large sets of data and be able to work with artificial intelligence. You see the same thing for critical thinking, creative thinking, analytical thinking. What you're not seeing is a ton of people saying we need more people who are good number crunchers. And so the reality is that the vast majority of K-12 education math centers, regardless of state or country, are be a good number cruncher. And so we need to have a shift. Now the question is, what do we shift to? And the case I want to make, which kind of I think ties well into Courtney's story, is what will AI not replace? And I think that at least, I mean, that's a very hard question to look at in the large long-term scale, but I think at least in the short-term scale, actual creative thinking, problem solving is not as easily replaceable. Most of the AIs that we're seeing are just banging words together in predictable patterns. They're not actually doing real reasoning. And I think that anytime teachers have an opportunity to teach problem solving and thinking like that, that's absolutely a skill we should take. Here's kind of a bigger shift that I use or that I talk about in the talk. Historically, we've taught the content standards and we use the practice standards or process standards, depending on where you are, to teach them. What I'm proposing is that we teach the process or practice standards and we use the content standards as the context so that we're teaching kids how to think, how to communicate, how to articulate their reasoning and that's not going away as quickly. So these are obviously, I mean, I'm really going to be looking forward to listening to this in 3 years and realizing how irrelevant what I said is now. But like in this moment, this seems like the right answer to me.
So within those process standards too, I'm wondering if, and what do you guys think about, should we be assessing like soft skills as well? Like, is that like, are we missing the opportunity in terms of like communication and presenting skills and, things that are very relevant, maybe not in all fields, but in many fields? Like, is that something where it's like maybe process standards with soft skills and then like you said, Robert, like incorporating content standards. I know this may be a very nuanced conversation, but I'm wondering where those fit in as well. And where this is coming from is I had a conversation with somebody that at their school, they value the soft skills and the presentation skills more. And Robert, I think you were there when we were talking about it. And I'm curious how that fits, in the American education system.
So we just got done with like a year-ish long contract with the state of Indiana where we were taking groups of educators out into the field and um, and they were exploring careers. They were exploring the world that they don't know so that they could come back and in turn um, develop curriculum that would, do college and career readiness, for lack, I mean, that sounds so formal, but hopefully you're catching my drift. And it didn't matter where we were. If we were at the dairy farm, if we were at the Indiana Fever Stadium, if we were, at the factory on the Ohio River, it didn't matter where we were. The number one thing every single person said they needed students to come out of high school and college being able to do is communicate. Everywhere. And I was absolutely fascinated by that. I didn't get to go on all of the excursions, although that would have been really fun. But, and so I asked, like, what did they say? How did they answer that question? And it was always communication. And that blew my mind because of how much students aren't giving the opportunity to communicate in schools. And so it's an interesting question that you asked Robert or Rob about assessing it. I don't know how to assess that. I'm thinking about my speech and debate class in college that I like got a C in, which is super ironic given how much I talk now. But but I don't know how to assess that. So that's a really good question. But I do know, and what I think is incredible is how we can use math to teach communication and how we can use that argument. Employers need people to be able to talk and communicate because they don't, out in the world on their own. How we can say, so we need to be doing that more across the board, and that includes math class. So, but
Mm.
assessment, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, and maybe that's part of what's broken, right? That's like we need to promote communication skills a little bit more, right? And Robert, I'll give you the opportunity to kind of speak on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, building upon what I said earlier, again, I think we assess what's easy to assess, not what is important to assess. I mean, truthfully, I don't know how you would scale assessing students on some of these really meaningful things. I think no one's going to be shocked to hear that communication is an important skill. I do think that even just with looking at communication, it gives us a nuanced reality that we can kind of unpack. And what I mean by that is what does it even mean to be good at communication? Like so far, this conversation has been like, it's not fiery. It's like really reasonable and thoughtful. I mean, I guess that's now giving myself a compliment, which is kind of awkward. But what I mean is it's not like what you see on these pundits on political channels where communication's about like yelling down someone, making this case, showing them all the ways they're wrong. Like, at least in this conversation, we're trying to build upon this towards working towards something. And I just wonder, like, if you were to have 100 people measure and rate our communication, like, will some think this is great and some think this is a failure, and vice versa? If they're watching a political pundit, is that great? So I just think it really unpacks what does success even look like, and just the complex realities that we each kind of bring in our own biases and experiences and preferences.
Okay, I have one last question to kind of bring us home here. And Courtney, you brought up the worry about deficit thinking too much in education, right? And so I want to end on a positive note. So you both pointed out lots of issues and things you'd like to change in the education system, and I'm sure Rob and I agree in many of these ways. But I wonder what are some of the biggest successes you see in the current math education system? Like just one or two, can you name of things that are working in your opinion, or things that we can build from?
I think my celebrations are the tiny little things that happen. My celebrations are like the opportunities, like when teachers are seeking learning opportunities, that that's a success. When learning opportunities are made accessible to people so that when they seek them out, they have them, like that's a success. That was one of my biggest takeaways after being in Atlanta for NCTM and NCSM. I was like, oh my gosh, and I run a professional learning department. So I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's so much that needs to be learned. There's so much information that it's not fair that all teachers don't get to hear. We have to figure out how to make it more accessible to them so that they can and help them understand like why they need to hear it. The other huge, massive thing that came for me that came out of that week was just the notion of math identity and trauma and anxiety. And like, this is not new news. I can still remember the first class I took in 2014 in my PhD work where I first learned about math identity. And I was driving home with my friend from Bloomington, who we both commuted from Indianapolis. And I was like going on and on and on and on and on about math identity. And I was like, why have we not been talking about this before? Like, this is the issue. The lack of like connection people have with mathematics, like that is where this all has to begin. And so I have hope in the fact that now that like the Academy was publishing their very well researched peer-reviewed articles on math anxiety and math identity is now getting into the hands of teachers and leaders who need to hear that and understand why that is something that we can't overlook. And the state of Indiana is had like schools have to do this plan for tier 2 and tier 3 instruction. I'm getting a lot of calls about that, and they're like, what do we need to be thinking about? I'm like, well, number one is your tier 1 instruction, and number two is the math identity and the math teaching identity of the people in your school. Those are the first two things that you have to think about before we even talk about the other stuff. And they're hearing me. Like they're not blowing it off. They're not like, that's fluffy. And I think that that is a really big deal because that stuff takes a lot of time. And unlike the teaching of reading, that's an obstacle that has to be conquered. So I'm really hopeful in all of that.
So I'll build off of what Courtney was saying because I think that the math anxiety piece is right on point. And I'm going to connect to the work of two math educators whose work I really believe in. So one of them, we have Vanessa Vicaria, and you have her book, Math Therapy, up on your wall right there. I think that it's really interesting to look at it through the lens of some people love what she's doing and some people get really uncomfortable by it. And I think it's really interesting to look at both because some people think, oh, what is math therapy? But it's reality that a lot of people have anxiety about mathematics. Like just the thought of doing mathematics makes them like stress out and their chest tightens. And that's not good because when you don't see yourself, when that is the response that you have, this anxious response, and you have this traumatic response, because almost everyone, if you ask just as a party trick, ask someone, when did you stop liking math? Like very few people will have that answer for like science or, reading. Maybe there'll be something, but the reality is like, it was some impossible test or a time test or having to go do something in front of people. And just, I think that her work is doing a lot to help people just realize that some of the things we've come to accept as just, that's part of teaching math. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. And if we have better ways of doing it, then we make math accessible for more people. Again, just being real, historically, if you're white, straight, male, math is for you. And if you're a person of color or a woman, maybe it's not so much for you. And that's not the narrative we want to continue. And just making spaces to talk about the traumas that people have experienced is very important. The second educator I want to highlight is, Peter Liljedahl's Building Thinking Classrooms. I've just seen so much, like in using this with all sorts of students, I have found kids more engaged and more encouraged to share their thinking. And that is just not something that has been at present. And I think these two things are really positive highlights in the last years that will do a lot to, quote unquote, fix math education. But I think that, and maybe tying it back to Rob's comment, there are a lot of soft skills that these are not explicit math standards we need to teach. It's not different ways of teaching the standards, but it's just some of the ways that we teach math have not been meeting students' needs. And rather than changing the students to work with our way of teaching, we can change the way we teach to meet their needs.
Hi, listeners. Before we get into final arguments, we want to pause and have you ponder for a moment. What did the guest just say? And what stood out for you?
Whatever is on your mind, we want to hear it.
Did you know you could text us your thoughts?
Just head to the show notes for this episode and look for the Text Us link. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
And with that, let's hear our closing statements.
All right, well, that concludes our questioning round. We will now end by giving each side a minute or two to make their final arguments to you.
And we're going to begin with Courtney. Courtney, your time is now.
So I really appreciate the conversation about like the definition of broken because I was thinking a lot about that definition and just kind of like what are the things that I have felt were broken like in my own life, because that's like, wow, that's a big statement. And so, and I couldn't, there's things break all the time, but I was thinking like a big one was the car that I drove in college. I had inherited an old Ford Taurus station wagon from my parents, and the fender was held together by duct tape. The roof leaked. It frosted from the inside. Like the whole thing was a mess, but it totally ran. Like it got me to where I needed to go. And so it wasn't broken. And And people might have argued it was, but it wasn't. Like it ran until I ran it into a pole, and then it was totally broken. And I often wonder if like my soul ran that thing into a pole because I so badly wanted a new car. But I was thinking a lot about that, and I was thinking about the notion of like duct tape. Like the duct tape was holding together my fender, and we this came up a little bit in our conversation, and there was a towel in my car, so where it leaked depended on, I don't know, how the rain was falling. I don't know. But if I got wet, there was a towel in my car. So I had these like little ways to remedy it, but it wasn't solving the overall problem. But also, did I have a problem if the car was getting me to where I needed to go? I just wasn't like comfortable doing it. So I've been thinking a lot about like what broken means and what we do when we think something's broken and we do like a quick fix. Like, let's find the curriculum, let's hire the people, let's, call in, whoever, let's make a law, like whatever the decision comes to be made. And I just feel like if we really look at the big picture, there's so many different entities involved, and there's so much need for conversation among all of those people that like if we create some kind of synergy in understanding what's happening at each level, and we're all not like living in these silos, like it matters. The first grade teacher that's teaching how to decompose to make 10 to add 9 plus 7, like that matters. Like even if the kid has a different way to think about it, knowing why that work matters for later on. And it matters that they know that, and that they can't say that doesn't have anything to do with me, I'm just worried about this, what I have to teach. So it's conversations that simple, and then in the much wider array between businesses and colleges and universities and um, politicians. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. But I mean, I think that's the challenge. I think that's what we have to be up for doing and engaging in, and looking at the overall systemic issue.
All right. And with the final word, we have Robert.
I think that Courtney and I agree on more than we disagree upon. I think that the big difference is just what does it mean to be broken?
Yeah.
So if we change broken to just not working well for most people, then I think that's something that maybe, well, at the very least, I agree upon. And I want to just reiterate, like students are telling us that the way we're teaching math is not working to them, for them. Teachers are telling us that the way that we're teaching math is not working for them. Universities are telling us this. Employers are telling us this. And I think I want to share some data about AP Calculus just so we can see the scope of this. So the NCES conducted a longitudinal study where they studied about 800,000 U.S. high school students who enrolled in calculus class in 2015 to 2016. Of those, these are our quote unquote best and brightest, right? These are the kids who made it through the system. Only about 18.5% of them passed AP Calculus and went on to Calc 2. So that's saying that like roughly more than 80% of them went through our system, passed AP Calculus, went to college, and didn't even take the next class. They repeated AP Calculus, or worse, they took maybe college algebra, or they stopped taking math. So the way that we are teaching math is not meeting students' needs. Whether it's broken or just not working well, I think we have a lot of room for improvement. I want to very much agree with Courtney that I don't want this to seem like an excuse, that this is not, that it's unfathomably unfixable. I don't want there to be deficit-based thinking. I think she's 100% right with that. But I think that we cannot keep thinking that the way we're teaching math is working for everyone. It's just not.
All right. Thank you both. And that concludes this fabulous debate. You've given us so much to think about and really got us scratching our heads.
And now it's up to our listeners to take a moment, ponder what was said today, share with friends, and consider what resonated with you. You can follow us on Blue Sky at Debate Math Pod to share your thoughts on this debate. What stood out for you?
And again, huge thanks to both of our guests. You showed how adults can get into I'll put it in air quotes, argument very professionally and thoughtfully. And we really appreciate that.
And also thanks to all those who are listening. And we hope you enjoyed and learned from this.
So as we wrap up, Robert, where can listeners find you, learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, I'm on social media at Robert Kaplinski on most platforms. And if you want to learn more about my work, you can check out openmiddle.com or grassrootsworkshops.com.
And Courtney, where can listeners find you?
I'm either at CFLUS on Blue Sky, or I'm at Math and Other Things on Instagram. Or you can always find me at keepindianalearning.org. It's about keeping everyone learning, not just Indiana.
Awesome, thank you. Want to learn more about incorporating debate activities into your math classroom? Go to luzniak.com/podcast to sign up for my mailing list, learn more about debate math, and connect with resources you could use in your classroom today. That's luzniak.com/podcast.
Feel free to reach out to us with comments and questions on debatemath.com, or follow us on social media at debatemath or at debatemathpod on Twitter.
And don't forget that you can text us with your thoughts on any of the debates too.
You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts.
Or wherever you listen to this podcast. Your feedback is super important to us. Well, that's all from us.
Looking forward to debating with you next episode. Until next time, cheers.